operations and local development. We'll begin with Hamza Sohail's presentation on supply responses of major crops of Punjab in Pakistan. And yeah, let's get going. We'll have about 15 minutes per presentation, a few minutes for discussion comments, and then we'll open it up to audience questions.
Hi everyone, am I audible? Yeah. So the paper that I'll be presenting today is on supply responses. This is not visible. This is a joint effort with two of my professors at LUMS, Dr. Mushtaq and Dr. Usama. This started as my master thesis presentation, and over the years or so, we worked on it, and I'll be taking you through the preliminary results from this study. So just to give you an overview, we are estimating supply responses for wheat, rice, cotton, and sugarcane. And supply responses basically tell us about the decision-making process of farmers and the elasticities that are obtained as a byproduct from estimating these responses. Give us an insight into the relationship between different inputs, which all in all help us simulate policy changes. A key novelty of this paper is that we explicitly account for weather effects across different phenological stages within a crop. And just to elaborate on this term, phenological stages, each crop has four broad phenological stages: sowing, tillering, maturing, and harvesting. And we look at the effect of weather on all of these four stages. Um, just to summarize the results from the study, our study suggests a complementary relationship between variable inputs. So basically, we have three inputs in our study: seed, water, and fertilizer. Just to give you an example, in case of wheat, 10% increase in the price of wheat leads to approximately 13% decrease in the quantity of seed demanded. Um, Furthermore, our estimates on weather variables suggest that uh, a 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature during the harvesting stage for wheat leads to approximately 2300 rupees decrease in farmers' profitability. And a 1 millimeter increase in total rainfall during this stage leads to approximately 2700 rupees per acre decrease in farmers' profitability, which on the national level translate to approximately 900,000 metric tons of loss in yield for wheat from an increase in degree Celsius, from increase in temperature, and 1 million metric tons loss in yield from an increase in rainfall. So, talking about the motivation for this study, there are two basic motivations. One is that we all know that agriculture is a very vulnerable sector in Pakistan's economy, and fluctuation in input-output prices force the farmers to recalculate their product mix on an yearly basis. Um, Furthermore, we all know that the production in this sector is highly sensitive to adverse climatic events. Um, the second sort of motivation is that there's a massive gap in literature. The last, especially in the case of Pakistan, the last paper that estimated supply responses was by Dr. Mubarak Ali back in 1988, and the insights from this paper are still used in sort of our policy design in agriculture sector. He basically estimated a auto-regressive moving average model on expected prices, and the main insight that was derived from this study was that support price has little potential in increasing overall agriculture productivity. Our paper adds to this literature by estimating supply responses using fairly newer data to account for any technological change that has happened in the past 36 years. Using a translog profit function, which is a flexible function form, and meanwhile also controlling for the weather effects on farmers' profitability. So, in our study, we basically look to answer three research questions. First is that does output supply really respond to change in prices when estimated through a profit function? What's the second question is what's the relationship between inputs now? compared to the study that was done in 1988? And do they have complementary or substitutive relationship, and how does that relationship vary across crops? And the third is, what is the impact of weather variability on farmers' profitability, and how does this impact changes across phenological stages, both in crop and across crops? So in our study, we are using two main data sets. First is our crop data, which has information on yield values, input costs, input quantities, and other variables as well. And this is something that the crops reporting service, which is based at the Agriculture Department of Punjab, collects on an yearly basis. And for our weather data, we're using an online source called Reliable Prognosis, which collects hourly weather information on temperature and rainfall for 14 districts of Punjab. And for the districts where we don't have any data, we use the data for the closest district as a proxy. So this is just some of the summary stats for basically mean values for some of the key variables from our crop data. Similarly, here we have the average values for different crops for our weather variables, so sowing, tilling, maturing, harvesting for each of the stages, and similarly for rainfall. Here we're looking at some sort of a descriptive analysis of rice yield across two time periods, and we can see that in 2017, in the southern part of Punjab, there's been a decrease in rice yield in 2017 compared to 2014. Similarly, here we're looking at the yield for cotton, and we can see that in those time periods, the cotton yield has increased compared to rice. So moving on to the estimation methodology, we are estimating two equations in our study. The first one is our main profit equation, which is a normalized restricted profit. And on the right hand side, we have prices of inputs, outputs, cross terms, weather variables, their interaction term as well. And then we have share equations. We basically have three share equations in our model, one for each input. So seed, water, and fertilizer. And we estimate a four set of equations for each of the crop using a seemingly unrelated regression, which basically simultaneously estimates the four equations for each crop. So this is just a description of the estimation methodology. We impose homogeneity and symmetry restrictions as well. Just a brief description of the variables that were shown by the previous slide. So moving on to the first set of results, which basically answer our first research question, is that output supply is responsive to change in prices for all of the crops. And we can see that the estimates that are derived from the regression results are statistically significant, at least at the 10% level of significance. And we can see that the wheat is the most responsive crop of all, and these estimates are elastic as well. So to answer our second research question, here we're looking at the cross price elasticities of different inputs, and we can see that because all of the elasticities are negative, we can see that all of the inputs across all of the crops have a complementary relationship. So an increase in price of one input can have a drastic impact on the quantity demanded of the other. And except for the elasticity estimate for wheat, water fertilizer for wheat, which is 0.03, the rest are significant, at least at the 10% level of significance. The third is our the estimates of our weather variables, which are obtained from our profit equation. And we can see that the marginal impact of weather on profitability is heterogeneous across phenological stages and crops, with wheat being the most sensitive crop to weather effects. If you look at the coefficient of temperature 4 for wheat, we can see that a 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature during the harvesting stage leads to approximately 6.47% decrease in wheat farmers' profitability. Similarly, increase in rainfall, if you look at the coefficient for rainfall 4, 1 millimeter increase in rainfall leads to a 7.28% decrease in wheat farmers' profitability. And if you look at sugarcane, there is a positive impact on profitability, an increase in temperature and rainfall for these stages. So just to conclude, These results have significant policy implications, particularly regarding to agriculture planning and weather adaptive strategies. Um, for example, the own price elasticity estimates being consistent with economic theory point towards having price stabilizing mechanism for different crops, which can safeguard farmers, may yield a positive impact on agriculture productivity and ensure a sustainable production. Um, the complementarity relationship between key inputs points towards using integrated input management policies that allow for a balanced use of all the inputs that a farmer uses. And so the weather effect variables have like point us towards using investing in R&D firstly, uh, so that we use climate resilient varieties of seeds for different crops. Um we should sort of have policies that educate our farmers on modern agriculture practices, for example, conservation tillage, or staggered sowing, or having precision agriculture as well. So yeah, that's about it from my end, and I'll stop here. Yeah.
Thank you, Hamza. So Ashar will offer some comments, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. Thank you.
So we are following like after each paper.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Sure.
Yes, of course, please.
So it was a very interesting paper, like a lot of math equations. And apart from, thank you so much. So I actually had some comments about so the paper initially mentions like there is a spatial dimension in terms of like how crops are sort of how crops kind of situate across Punjab. So just one thing, maybe like some sort of a descriptive analysis could be more helpful in that sense. Like for example, a Lisa model can further be incorporated as an extension. Maybe that is one thing. From the policy side, the paper does frequently mention about like the suitability of sugarcane crop specifically. So I had one question that it's because of is it because of greater sort of favorable policies towards sugarcane industry or agriculture in general, or is it just because of maybe it's more suitable for the geography in Punjab?
So you're talking about the increase in yield.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it might be because like sugarcane is a highly regulated crop, because sugar prices are regulated, and it's favorable. It's less risky for the farmers to grow because they know that they'll get going to get a certain amount of money after. So yeah, I think it might be, but we haven't looked at it that way.
Because it was quite interesting to see that it's also the most profitable
Yeah.
agriculture output. Because of course I don't have a background in agriculture, but like when I thought of it, so for me it was more like maybe cotton is a more profitable.
So that has got to do something with the timelines of these crops. So sugarcane is a year-long crop, and if a farmer commits to growing sugarcane, he'll be committed to that for the entire year. Whereas in other cases, the farmers are either using a wheat rice mix or wheat cotton mix. But still, if we combine the profitability of wheat rice and wheat cotton, we'll still see that sugarcane is more profitable.
Right.
Just because of the policies that are helping farmers mitigating their risks as well. But still, in that case, the difference is much lower compared to if you look at solely cotton versus sugarcane and not wheat, cotton versus sugarcane. So yeah.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah, that's pretty much it from my side. But of course, a really fascinating paper.
Shall we take questions from the audience? Ji, please go ahead.
First of all, that's a really interesting paper. I think it's really important to look at the supply side effects because I think a lot of the focus goes on to what the demand is, and we're not looking at elasticities. Also, really interesting to see the cross price elasticities. My question here was that have you considered digging a bit deeper into the different types? So not just the inputs, but the different types of inputs. So, for example, types of fertilizers, and maybe if there's some sort of complementarity or some sort of substitution effect within that, or water sources. So just keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so here what we basically did was that so we had information on all of the different fertilizers in the data, but we collected them and made a Tonkus-Thiel index based on all of the fertilizers, which is basically the relative index to a translog profit function. So we combined them and made a single price index for fertilizer. But yeah, we can look at that and see how different fertilizers react to each other. Yeah.
Yep, Farhan.
Thank you, Hamza. This was really interesting. I'm wondering if you can provide a bit more insight. This is following from the previous comment as well. So my sense was also maybe want to emphasize the last result a bit more in terms of which inputs or which fertilizers may be better, because the first one, which is saying minimum support prices, may be problematic in certain circles, so let's suppose when the minimum support price itself is uncertain, then it may lead to more uncertainty, right? So if you don't know as an institution if that's going to be there at the end of the season for you, which farmers do experience now, so that in itself introduces a sense of uncertainty. And so in some sense, some of the other things that you're recommending about the inputs being climate resilient inputs may be something that's worth making a stronger point about.
Okay.
Yeah, Hamza, do you want to respond to that?
No, I think we can. We're still working on it, and it's still a work in progress, and we can try to add more justification for different policy implications that there is. So yeah, we can add to that.
Do you have any other questions? Mushtaq sir, would you like to add something? No, Osama?
So just a point, I think, fair point on the minimum support price. There is a heterogeneity across crops. So usually wheat is offered a minimum support price. It's not so much the case for the other crops, and it sort of varies by year as well. So this is something that we've been discussing as well, as to maybe sort of also include, dummy variable for when a minimum support price is there, and how it affects. My sense is from some analysis that oftentimes some farmers aren't even offered. Sometimes they're offered an average price which is much lower than the minimum support price, right? So we also have to dig in whether we can see, at least at the farmer level, which farmers are actually benefiting from minimum support price as well. But yeah, fair point. I think, yeah, this is something we have to take into account.
Any other questions? Hamza, you would like to add something? Yeah. Okay. We'll have the second presentation by Ashar, and this is on the Chinese offshore investments, local economic development, and poverty. This is a case study of CPEC. Yeah, please. नहीं ये नहीं ये वाली जो
Okay, so I'll just start. Hi, everyone. So the interesting thing about this paper is that it's from my dissertation I wrote when I was doing my MSc at the London School of Economics. And it is a result of a lot of struggle between what should I do kind of a situation. But anyways, so just a brief overview of the presentation. So I'll be going over the background of a little bit context about the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is sort of the case study for this project, and then the data and empirical strategies that I have used to estimate the impact of CPAC on local economic development. So it's basically two different types of estimation strategies that I've employed. My baseline results, the heterogeneity analysis that I've conducted, and followed by the conclusion. So there are some more things into this, but of course, with the time constraint, these are the things that I will be considering during the presentation. So a bit of the context of CPAC. So CPAC, I'm assuming that everyone knows what the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is, but it's mostly an extension of the Belt and Road Initiative from the Chinese government. CPAC basically connects the region of Kashgar in Xinjiang to the warm water port in Gwadar. So the key idea behind this whole route is to sort of overcome the constraints Chinese face in their trade route, which goes from the Malacca Strait. So far, roughly around $65 billion worth of investment has been committed by the Chinese government, but 25 billion of which has been materialized by around 2018 for the phase one of the project. So, however, the problem is that little is known about the local economic impact of the project. So, for example, like how does the projects, the Chinese projects that have been so far established, how do they affect the local economy? Most of the work so far is around the geostrategic nature of CPAC or the larger macroeconomic dimensions. So this is something which I sort of wanted to consider. Similarly, there is like less evidence about the welfare impact. Of course, there are a number of things the government mentions about it. So it will increase employment, will increase the productivity of the regions, but to what extent is something which I kind of tried to consider. So the data comes from three different sources primarily. First one is the data for the Chinese projects. So that data comes from a data center. So they have a repository of all the global Chinese projects that have so far materialized and are committed. And the data is georeferenced, so you have locations of those projects as well. So roughly around 80%, according to my own cross verification, were available in the data set. But then I also reviewed the documents that are available on the CPAC website to see that what other projects are there, and had to manually geolocate some of them. So the first estimation is strategies in IV analysis. So for this, the outcome variable is nocturnal luminosity. Because of the fact that Pakistan does not have local GDP statistics and we do not collect information on local economic development. So in that sense, I had to use some sort of a proxy for it. And based on my literature review, nocturnal luminosity came out to be a nice, suitable sort of, proxy to measure economic development at the local level. Second one is a difference in difference analysis, which is conducted using Pakistan Standard of Living Measurement Survey. But this is less localized. So because the only geographical denomination that is there for the PSLM is a district, the first analysis goes deeper to the tehsil level. So why nightlight as a proxy? So there is one thing is that there is not enough data available. You don't have local GDP statistics. So in that sense, nightlight, sort of, for example, one of my own professors' work, Professor Henderson's work on nightlight shows that, it's a really good proxy for what kind of economic activity is happening and to what extent one can proxy for the extent of economic activity that is happening in a localized geography. So I use for this, there is a scatter plot over there. So this is like, because I wanted to consider the welfare impact as well. So I had to like check that as well. So for instance, on the, on the horizontal axis, you have nightlight, but it's highly correlated with the wealth index for each clusters of the DHS survey, which is the demographic health survey. It's very similar to the PSLM, but it provides geolocations for it, so you can kind of see it. But the problem is that it's only for like 2 years you have the geolocation. So again, like there's like limited data availability. So I use VIIRS, which is the visible infrared imaging radiometer suit satellite images, to kind of calculate the nightlight statistics. So this is the distribution of nightlight across Pakistan, just to give an overview. And this is my primary empirical strategy. So basically what I did was I geolocated all of these, all of these projects. So for instance, if you have one project, so I created a 30 kilometers buffer around it. So again, this comes from the literature, a more reasonable guess of to what extent there might be an impact. But I do change the buffer size as well for the robustness checks. Similarly, if you have a road project, sort of a road or like more of a transportation project, so like a buffer would look something like that. Anything within the 30 kilometer range is something that is considered as street edge, so a binary variable which takes the value of 1 and 0 otherwise. So had it been a randomized location, so it would have just simply one can use a fixed effects model to kind of estimate the impact, but this is not the case. So I have used a 2SLS model over here, an IV2SLS model, for which I have used I have used IV, which has received some critique, but the justification I have presented in the paper is that it's a conditionally valid IV, which is the distance from the port. So the literature sort of suggests that if a tehsil happens to be closer to a port based on the road networks from 2012, which is way before the CPAC started to materialize, and for which I had the data. Then and if you remove Karachi from if you remove Karachi from the analysis, so the distance from port in Pakistan does not impact economic development to an extent, especially if you're removing Karachi from the analysis, because of the demographic distribution across the Indus Delta, which is different from, for example, like countries like United States, where the coastal regions are far more developed. So that is what I have done over here. And yeah, but again, there are problems with this. It's also a distance-based measure when in fact, there are transportation projects that are part of the CPEC as well. So I cannot completely rely on my first empirical strategy. So to kind of overcome that limitation, I use another empirical strategy, which was DID. The reason also to do this was because in any case, night light is not a welfare outcome. It might, show the level of economic activity happening, but it's still not a valid proxy for dimensions of poverty or dimensions of welfare. So for that, I used the DID model and data from the PSLM. So as I mentioned, IV has two problems. A, doesn't directly capture the welfare effect, and then conditional exclusion concerns are there, which is why I'm using this model. So my DID model looks something like this. And for that, my outcome variable is a deprivation score constructed through the multi-dimensional poverty idea presented by Alkire and Foster's. So it has three dimensions. One is dimension of health, dimension of education, living standards, and then the aggregate. So to further add robustness to my DID analysis, I also conducted pre-baseline matching. Because there is a substantial overlap, which you can see in the first figure over here, there's a substantial overlap of propensity scores. So the more suitable, model that kind of was suitable for this kind of a matching was an inverse probability weighting. And that is what I have done over here at the pre-baseline to add robustness to the DID analysis. So some of the baseline results, so you can see over here, the OLS coefficients are smaller but significant, that there is roughly around 26 percentage points increase in nocturnal luminosity. The IB coefficients are, of course, they're much higher. So to an extent, what my advisor told me are outrageous. But the justification over here, again, I have also added a case study. In the paper, the idea again was that a lot of these Chinese projects are located in places where there was nothing before. So if you are constructing something literally out of existence, so you will have a lot of economic activity over there as well. So this is like a more visual representation. So over here, you can see there are all those Chinese projects geolocated. And then, the change in nocturnal luminosity from 2015 to 2020. The baseline DID analysis also shows there are significant changes happening. So, for example, the living standards, there is a decrease in deprivation where, the Chinese projects have been constructed. Similarly, there has been a decrease in educational deprivation, not too big, but still it's significant. And also total deprivation has went down by roughly 6%. But health deprivation, interestingly, has gone up. So I've also conducted a heterogeneity analysis in this regard, which is the first one is the project sector. So what sector is more beneficial? So kind of like this shows that only energy infrastructure that has been constructed under CPAC has the most significant leads to a most significant change in, for instance, nocturnal luminosity in that region, and it kind of also does make sense. Then in terms of DID, again, you can see that transport infrastructure have a positive impact, positive in terms of like how it is alleviating poverty, but negative in terms of like how it's changing deprivation. So negative over here will be a positive outcome. And then energy projects also have, but that is much smaller when it comes to welfare changes. Social sector projects also have a negative impact on deprivation, but that is very minimal in comparison to the others. Then I also classified the projects by the duration, so how long a project has existed versus how short it is. So the reasonable kind of measure here was 3 years. Any project that is sort of longer than 3 years, the duration more than 3 years have elapsed since it was inaugurated. So that takes a value 1 and 0, and then the other one, and these are separately calculated under two different equations. In the same equation as two different variables. So it does show that the longer the duration of project, the higher the level of economic activity versus if the project has been less than 3 years have elapsed since the project was inaugurated. Similarly, for the DID analysis, well, over here there is some ambiguity. There is not big of a difference when it comes to the welfare outcomes. Like, for instance, only I think 3 to 4 percentage points difference between if a project has existed for more than 3 years versus if it has not existed for more than 3 years. ultimately conclusion, at least my analysis shows that there is a net positive impact, at least in terms of local economic development and economic activity, changes in welfare in the regions that have received the project. My extension of this analysis in the paper, which I've not went into detail over here, also shows that places that were more deprived have received a better sort of the impact is better over there versus other regions that were already possibly developed. So the analysis I've also went into indirect channels of how this impact has materialized in the paper. So I've considered areas of schooling and productivity measures such as per day wage, for which the questions are available in the PSLM. And again, that kind of confirms the key hypotheses of the paper. But there are several limitations. The methodology, I would like to hear more on that as well. Any suggestions? B is that the financial scale of the project not analyzed due to constraints and ambiguities in the data. So I do not consider at all if it's a big project, a small project, to what extent, how much money went into that project or not. Similarly, political economy concerns per se are not addressed in the empirical analysis. So this was more like an impact study, and I do not go into the political economy problems that might be associated with the Chinese infrastructure. And also, it's hard to disaggregate if because most of the CPEC projects are like joint ventures. So I can really not see if if it's more because of the investment that is coming from within Pakistan or outside Pakistan, because that data is not available. So yeah, and there are some policy takeaways, which is like if we are to enhance absorptive capacities of lagging regions, then maybe aid responses can be further optimized. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashar. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to offer some comments, and perhaps you can note some of my questions, and then I'll let you respond, and then we can take questions from the audience. Just uh, I'll come to the audience very, very quickly. I do not want to take a lot of time. Firstly, I do think I think this is a timely paper, because a decade on, I think it's important to assess the impact of Chinese investment, and to scrutinize it in this country. Also, on the choice of data and the methodology, and the way you've conducted this analysis, I think it's good for the profession, because it's something a bit different from the old tired methods and the old tired data sets of how we think of economic and political economic analysis. So I think that's definitely a positive. And so here's my question: What are you familiar with community level evaluations of the local impact of this Chinese investment? Because and how does that relate to your findings? Because and this is related to my next question: that is it that there's little known about the local impact, or is it because economists and political scientists are out of the loop? I find it very hard to believe that the local impact of CPEC is not known to the local communities. And so perhaps you can comment about that. And what would it take to develop a more hyper local or granular view of the local impact of these investments? Second, just two more things. I would like you to comment on whether you've tried to dig deeper into those aspects of the research where you're seeing a minimal positive impact on local development, or even a negative one, for example, through the energy projects on health. And have you tried digging deeper into that at all? And finally, perhaps you can comment on some of the political economy aspects of this investment. I'm sure you're familiar, and I think that might be of interest to the audience. It's certainly of interest to me. So perhaps you can respond to these things, and then we'll take questions from the audience.
Um, Okay, so these are like very interesting questions, and the best part about this is that it relates with one of the papers like I'm working on now, which is more of a community based analysis, a qualitative analysis. So that kind of serves serves as an extension of this, and we are conducting like a study in Third Parker, and we have conducted like a number of interviews with people who live in Tharpakar, and where the for example the joint venture of Tharcoal was constructed, and kind of try to analyze how the community feels about all these kind of projects that are being constructed. So like once again it's a mixed response. What we have sort of analyzed so far is that it's very ambiguous in that sense. The community response is very ambiguous. So, for instance, if you talk to stakeholders, because that study is kind of, like divided into two different sets of, people, and we interview them differently. So, it's stakeholders like government officials and people who are, there and working with the government on the project. And the second one is basically the community, the people who live over there. So the portrayal of this is far more positive when it comes to the government officials and the stakeholders over there. They do strongly believe that it is leading to a sort of a positive impact in the region. On the other hand, we have heard of cases where there have been displacements happening. So, for example, communities have been displaced for the construction of the project. So that is something which is, of course, a negative welfare outcome. And yeah, so that is something which is big, which is sort of a big, not only a policy, but also a political economy concern for us. And specifically looking into how infrastructure kind of, is there to alleviate deprivations. But in fact, in many cases, it's the opposite, where, people are being displaced and not offered fair compensations. And that might increase their vulnerabilities, and it might increase their sort of deprivations as well. So this also relates to the second one, is which is the deeper analysis into the possible negative outcomes, so specifically when it comes to health outcomes. So this is something which we also kind of like try to incorporate in a qualitative study. And we kind of found that again there were negative environmental implications of at least for the case study we are looking into, and that for example the water quality has went worse after the construction of the project. So kind of this is suggestive of course it's not causal because it's not an empirical analysis and we don't have the data to kind of establish that, but suggestive that negative environmental externalities might be driving negative health outcomes as well, because the question in the PSLM is about and the one I use to construct my my health dimension for the multi-dimensional poverty index are questions like, for example, number of instances your child has suffered from diarrhea. Like, and if the water quality is bad, it makes sense that there will be more cases of diarrhea, right? So that is something which might be driving which might be driving our sort of negative outcome. And again, the political economy concern, as I mentioned, that it is a challenge. Specifically, literature from other countries goes into a lot of detail about this. There has been a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, about Chinese projects, and over there has been even empirical cases where for instance, Chinese projects might lead to negative outcomes in terms of corruption. So one of the paper, for instance, mentions that, and similarly, but overall, there have been studies which also mention that there has been more empowerment happening in terms of like greater level of employment in the region. So I think the political economy side is very mixed. But I think it also has to do with the fact that it's Chinese aid, and there is like a bit less transparency when it comes to the anything that is coming from there.
So what's gone into? I'm curious now that you've been responding. I'm thinking about this. What's gone into this net positive evaluation that the conclusion that you've come to, because it doesn't quite seem, what exactly is going on?
So that's what I've mentioned in my limitations as well, right? That it's basically the numbers might be suggestive of it, but more in-depth community level qualitative analysis might portray sort of a more nuanced outcome instead of like the net positive impact that we are seeing over here, and especially in terms of when it comes to economic activity. If infrastructure is being built, of course there will be more economic activity. So that conclusion does make sense, but we do need a more nuanced perspective, and that is why we are also like doing this qualitative study, a case study in Thapat.
All right, let's open it up to the audience for questions. I believe there were a few. Yes, please.
Assalamualaikum. I am Naim from IBA. In 2015, when CPEC was launched, President Xi announced a speech and said, "We want an interconnected world." But later on, a former Singaporean diplomat, Kishore Mahbani, wrote a book, Has China Won? And said, there is a sweet imperialism, Chinese imperialism. And for example, what happened in Hambantota, Sri Lanka, and in Gwadar port and at Punjab University, I have friends who are from Gwadar, and they are not saying and observing any community level change from Chinese investments and overburdening. And most importantly, he wrote 90% Chinese worker, do work there, and not localization of jobs and community benefits. And what do you think about this person?
So once again, as I mentioned, that this is something I have not gone into a lot of detail about, and it's a very big limitation in the study itself. But I do kind of think that when it comes to infrastructure development, so that might be something which is having a positive spillover in terms of, for example, more people might get employed when there is infrastructure being built. But what then is something which still remains fairly ambiguous. Like, even for instance, if you think about like projects like Gawad, projects that have been established in Gawad, for instance, it might have yielded a short-term, like positive spillover effect over there in terms of like more more economic activity happening over there, and that might yield a positive welfare outcome as well. But we don't really know. There is no sort of in detail analysis, even when it comes to local political economy of these Chinese investments. So that still remains very, very ambiguous. And it's very hard to sort of, like kind of analyze that, especially with this study, which just remains very limited in its domain. Yeah.
I am Ejaz from Al Barrio Engineering. As per Pakistan Engineering Council regulations, any imported company coming to Pakistan will employ engineers and technician and labor with the ratio of 70-30. 70% locals and 30% the firm can, in this case Chinese, can bring their expertise. But we have learned that Chinese were not comfortable with Pakistani labor and staff, and they complained with SN Iqbal Saab, Minister of CPEC, and he waived off that clause or restriction, and after that Chinese have brought almost 100% their engineers and technician. How true it is?
I think so. This is something which is like consistently highlighted in the literature as well. That this is not only true for Pakistan, but also like there have been some cases in other countries as well, where this has been the problem, right? So there is like an export of Chinese labor as well, which is kind of unique. For instance, when you compare it to like other kind of aid infrastructure that is being built, especially for instance if you compare it to Western aid, for example, World Bank or the US aid, where there is sort of, there is there are more people that are employed locally versus, for instance, in the case of China. It might actually be true, but again, like I don't have any sort of data to kind of confirm it. But this is I agreed to this to an extent that I have repeatedly seen concerns like these highlighted in the literature. And but not necessarily were a concern to me for this particular research, because this is more like an impact analysis and does not, once again, as I mentioned, does not go into the political economy details of Chinese infrastructure.
Ji, Osama?
Thanks, Ashar. Nice work. Just a couple of observations. So I take it you're proxying for the size of the local economy by looking at nightlight data, and that seems to be, I think, in the last few years, a fairly common approach. I'll repeat the concern that I've raised earlier with colleagues as well who've used this, is that it may be subject to measurement error if the local economy that you're studying is heavily reliant on agriculture, right? So think, for example, say Mansehra district in KP province. It's probably one of the richest districts, but it's heavily reliant on agriculture, right? So now you could say that within that 30-kilometer radius of the CPEC projects that you're studying, there's no agriculture that's happening, so it's not a concern for you. But that's something I think that I just wanted to sort of flag that point. A second observation with regards to one of the limitations you said about disaggregating or sort of disentangling Chinese investments versus Pakistan investment for particular projects, right, that are happening. One thing you could do is, so I believe this is still up online, but if you look at the Federal Ministry of Planning's website, I think this is still up there, but they have data that you can download for free, which lists, I think, on a monthly level, all of the disbursements that are happening for all of the federal PSTP projects, right? And that could be one way. And within those files, there's also a component where they disaggregate local expenditure versus, say, money coming in from from a foreign component, say a World Bank project or an ADB project. Chinese projects might be also, Chinese investments might sort of fall in there as well. So that could be something that you could use to try and sort of disentangle that. So just a comment on one of the limitations. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I've noted it down.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hassan. As a tax practitioner, I was involved with FPR regarding some tax Chinese companies and CPAC related tax issues. And with that, economic variables were also discussed. Few observations for your input for the next project. One is you may like to look at the organic growth that may occur and then see over and above organic growth, what was naturally occurring. So you may actually see that let's say your organic level is 5, so you may be seeing -3 or +5, something like that. So that will help you because these roads, there are two main arteries between Karachi and Peshawar, Highway, Indus Highway. So both have undergone for the last 25 years, massive expansion and improvement. So there will be exogenous factors which will be flowing in, as well as, and they could not be CPEC related only. So these are also interconnected. So somewhere Highway will connect from Multan, between Multan and DG Khan to the CPEC. So you may like to look at those variables as well in the next project. The other is variables like skill level instead of standard of living, entrepreneurial shape, and then awareness of some sort of variable. And you may also see that that it is not distance specific. So let's say there is the most capital intensive projects are energy based. Logistics is volume based. So the more volumes will flow, that will be and you can't have those without the infrastructure, i.e. the energy projects come in first. Unfortunately or fortunately, Pakistan indigenous construction companies have a lot of experience in putting up the grey works when it comes to energy projects. So the skill level above that should be kind of registered. KG, this is the improvement that has come in. And it should not be distance specific, because you can have something being built in Gujranwala and being planted in Gwadar. So that level skill has to be clustered specific rather than distance specific. Third is double taxation, and look at the economic variables, such as if the community level is growing, maybe the economic variables are being impaired, and the relationship between economic variables both at a national level and then at a tehsil level or road specific level, whatever you want, a cluster specific level. So you may actually see that there is a direct relationship, and I don't want to because I'm not an economist, but there could be an inverse relationship, which would be another interesting exercise to probe. You may actually see, due to my knowledge a little bit, the money is going out, flowing out, which is one of the grave concerns for the economic department, Ministry of Economic Affairs. And the other thing is compatibility and connectivity could be a variable. So what is the compatibility of the project with the local community? How well was the Chinese culture or whatever connected with the local community and the development of the skills? And so these are some of the observations. I'm sure
Thank you.
you will add more.
I mean, I just say one thing that, one of the things missing in the paper was that it did not have a full-fledged limitation sections, but now I have a full-fledged limitation section.
I think there were a few Abbas. It's been addressed. Okay, so efficient, like economists.
Oh, and I'm also not an economist.
Yeah.
Just to be fair, I am an economic geographer.
Close enough.
Okay.
We do have another few minutes. We're happy to take further questions. Ji.
It's more of a suggestion than a question. When you were mentioning your qualitative study on CPEC projects, perhaps you would better be cautious about taking into account other infrastructure projects as well. I mean, if you will be bashing CPEC related infrastructure projects and their adverse impacts, you might unintentionally be towing the line of Western imperial interests. So infrastructure project, not necessarily CPEC, but other infrastructure projects also have adverse impacts.
I mean, just to be, if anything is being recorded, just to be politically correct, I'm not bashing anyone. But yeah, that is something I'll definitely consider.
I think we're definitely recording. There are quite a lot of cameras, more cameras than PTV. So, any other questions? Ji.
Same Daniyal, for me, what I'm really getting to all this data for aerial data is look like really like a bit glorified version of CPAC. So like that, what is the benefit? What Daniyal another mentioned, what was happening on the ground? What was like what is what the fishing community, labor force, what in Mansera, agriculture impact, or local economy was impact. I think that part probably need a bit of field work, grounded field work, rather than just like aerial data and projecting that infrastructure what is gentleman asked. That one way of thinking.
No, that is of course something which which I am also considering. But even when it comes to like aerial data, for instance, like satellite data, so this is like something which I did in 2022. I started doing in 2022. But now even when it comes to like, for example, work in satellite imagery, that has also gone like. There has been development in that direction as well, especially when it comes to measuring poverty and like analyzing changes at the local level. For example, nightlight kind of got popular with Henderson's work. But now, for instance, there are works that talk about daylight changes that are happening. So those are all some things that can be considered. For example, rooftop imaging and other kind of things that can further suggest what is the welfare outcome at the local level. For example, what is the quality of the roofs of people living around these kind of projects. So that might be something of a better that might be a better variable to kind of consider. But yeah, otherwise the main thing that is like that should be done is like a field analysis, which is like collecting survey and all these kind of things. But again, that is something that does not happen in Pakistan frequently. And again, as I mentioned, we don't have local GDP statistics, so it's very hard to kind of do that. So kind of this is more like a first step towards kind of building that in future.
Right. Thank you. I think we'll
Sorry,
on to-
just one last question, if I may.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
My question is just a bit about the methodology. So you used nighttime luminosity. My question is just a bit to do with the timing. So, for example, you mentioned that it's projects which have been completed. Are we also considering the nighttime activity perhaps when the projects were ongoing, and perhaps there was more light during that time, there's activity during the night, and also, as mentioned before, that agricultural activity doesn't really show up on this. So maybe during the project, there seems to be like a spike in nighttime lights. Afterwards, there's a drop. So just understanding a bit of that baseline, I think would also be really helpful.
Yeah, so one thing definitely I think I've added in my robustness checks as well, which is the switch between like start date versus the date of completion. So for one analysis, I kind of replace it with the day like post completion, kind of like switch the dates to that versus the pre-completion one, because for the first analysis we have the panel data. For the second one, it's more limited because like we only have like 3 years of PSLM surveys used for this analysis. But yeah, for the first one, I have conducted that robust test, but I did find very similar outcomes for even for both the ongoing projects versus the projects that have been completed and have already been inaugurated. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. That was very interesting. Thank you, Ashar. And, we move now to the third presentation, which is by myself. This is a slightly updated version of a working paper, which is available. So if you look for if you look me up, if you look for this paper, you'll find a variation of this working paper online on my website. I've posted a thread on Twitter as well. And so this is so there's some data here that I'm going to show you, which is not quite there in the working paper, some arguments, but most of it, the basic outline of the argument is there and it's publicly available. The second thing is that I do want to acknowledge the work my RAs have been doing for me. That's Amil, Abdullah, Hafsa, and Javera. On this particular paper, all of the data visualization that you're going to see has been done by Amil. One important piece of the puzzle has been provided by Abdullah. He's worked on it and he's helped me put it together. So that has been very, very important. And the third disclaimer or preliminary remark is that if you think there's anything of value in this presentation, in this paper, something that rings true, it belongs to my teachers. Everything that rings false and is wrong blatantly belongs to me. So I'll begin by describing what I call the established problem and established view. And it's expressed by the established view is expressed by a number of economists, whether they're at the state bank, in the financial sector, in the public, financial analysts, international financial institutions, you name it. I'm especially nervous because Anjum Saab is here and Dr. Murtaza Saeed is also here. So I need to get this stuff right. So the established view is expressed all over the place, and its stake is essentially captured in this stagnant credit to the private sector. Now, why is private sector credit stagnant? And the answer, the established view. So this is the established problem. The established view is, well, of course, because all of the credit is increasingly going to the government sector. And this is repeated, accepted as fact. That the explanations, to whatever extent are provided, I do not think they are satisfactory. But in any case, these are the established view and the established problem. Now, the established view is presented as a fact. It is not a fact, it is a theoretical construction, which is driven largely by two convictions. Firstly, that sovereign debt, the Pakistani government's debt, is risk-free, and I don't think it is anymore. If you look at the Section 9C of the State Bank Act, which prohibits state bank lending to the government, that essentially means that the government has lost its main money creation mechanism, and sovereign debt is no longer risk-free or even low risk. And secondly, of course, there's the conviction that government borrowing crowds out the private sector. This established view is based, like I said, this is not an atheoretical construction. This is based on the commodity theory of money, which assumes that there is a scarce pool of loanable funds. It considers the central bank to be the main supplier of money. And so the scarce money supply, the scarce pool of loanable funds is what determines the private sector borrowing. And so because there's only so much to go around, most of it goes to the government, therefore the private sector doesn't get it. The reason this needs reframing is because the commodity theory of money is wrong. Now, why is this wrong? Or why is the endogenous credit theory of money right? We'll get into this in a little bit. The second thing is that I think there is serious sovereign risk and financial fragility in the banking sector, which is going ignored because of the theory that is at play, which is not even recognized that is the theory at play. Thirdly, there is an imbalance of power between the state bank and the government, which I think is quite critical, needs addressing, and that relates to the public character of the state bank as a public service institution. And finally, because we are working with a commodity theory of money, we are not fully able to understand the implications of the amendment to the State Bank Act, which took place almost now 3 years ago. So the standard exogenous money, commodity theory of money view, it makes the central bank the primary actor, which creates the pool of loanable funds. The banks then create loans out of deposits, and the almost passive actor in the story is the borrower, which receives the loan. The endogenous credit theory of money view is the causal sequence is completely the opposite. So we begin with the private sector borrower who demands credit, and that really is the source of the main variable which is shaping the money supply, which is the money supply being created not at the central bank, but actually within the banking sector, where banks are not creating loans out of deposits, but loans creating deposits. It's the other way around. So deposits don't create loans, loans create deposits. And so the money creation is actually happening within the banking sector. And the central bank is the accommodative force within this causal sequence. So the central bank simply accommodates the supply of reserve money or the monetary base and is the last actor in this system to get a say. And so the central bank simply ends up accommodating the demand for credit money. Now, why is in this view, we have private credit demand being driven by not by the fact that the government is taking up too much credit, but by profitability concerns and by business confidence and business conditions. That private credit demand then drives the money supply, which is being created in the banking sector, and finally, and so yes, so the credit money is being created in the banking sector. Now, why is this the right theory of money rather than the commodity theory of money? For that, again, the brief answer is that I can refer you to the post-Keynesian literature. I can refer you to this Bank of England paper. There's also a YouTube video at the Bank of England's YouTube channel on money creation in the modern economy. You can watch that. If you do not find this convincing, you can read this Deutsche Bundesbank paper. from the German central bank, which clearly refutes that banks are not intermediaries. The banking sector is where the money creation is happening. And if you find none of this convincing, you can look at the SPB issued banknotes and actually read what's on the banknote, which clearly states that the rupee is a promise of the state bank, which is guaranteed by the government of Pakistan. So it is money, the rupee is a credit. It is a promise. It is not a commodity produced by the state bank. Now, so because in this story, the borrowing, remember, it's the private sector borrower which demands credit, and that drives the money supply within the banking sector. What we're seeing here is, of course, in Pakistan, the private sector borrower has been replaced by the government as the main source of credit demand. And therefore, what we're seeing is this is essentially a post-COVID analysis, a post-pandemic analysis. So what we're seeing is the broad money supply essentially being, I see this as being pulled upwards by the government's credit demand within the banking sector. So the reframed problem focuses on two features of the federal government. Firstly, that the federal government is the primary source of credit demand in this economy, and that it is a non-money issuing actor ever since the 2022 amendment to the State Bank Act. And so the reframed question is this: why are banks lending to the government at all? Why are they betting on an actor whose debt is now not risk? It is no longer risk free. Why are they betting on such a non-money issuing borrower? This is the reframe problem. And I answer this through three propositions. Firstly, that the government of Pakistan is a reliable deficit spender. So the banking sector can reliably assess that the government of Pakistan is going to need money because it is a consistent deficit spender, and it's going to have to come back to the banking sector for the money that it needs now that it can no longer go to the state bank. The second proposition is that the banking sector has confidence in the state bank as a reliably accommodating central bank, which, as you can see in the reserve ratio, which is largely stable. And this is since January 2020. So this is the second proposition. So the banking sector has confidence in the government as a deficit spender and in the state bank as a provider of reserves. And this, I think, is the third proposition, which I think is the most important, that the banking sector is caught up in the euphoria of a boom in that sector. And if you look at, this is a pretty significant jump in profits over the past half decade or so. And so the banking sector, my suspicion is that the banking sector has not psychologically adjusted to the new institutional situation. And so, but we still need to come back to private credit demand, because that question is still a real question. Why is there stagnant private credit demand? So I've crossed off this high government borrowing story. This has to do with profitability, and it has to do with business conditions and business confidence. So I'm going to show you some data and charts which I think help explain why private credit demand is stagnant. It's stagnant firstly because profitability is tanking. This is return on equity, which has been adjusted for inflation. I've adjusted for inflation. The return of equity data is from the bank statements, the financial statements of the non-financial private sector from the state bank. And so it's tanking since 2016, and it's even negative for the past 2 years. So profitability is tanking. What do you need to borrow money for? If you look at the mean self-reported capacity utilization, this is from the State Bank survey, is barely struggling to get above 70%. What does the manufacturing sector need to borrow for? They're barely they're not operating anywhere near to capacity. And so the next few graphs are a bit different. These are diffusion indices from the State Bank's sentiment surveys. And so this is firstly a state of credit confidence in the country. So I've come up with this diffusion index. I've taken questions which concern credit demand and credit supply in the State Bank's business confidence surveys, and I've used those to create this index for these 4 sectors: wholesale, construction, services, and manufacturing. And this is barely, so anything above the 50% line, 50 line is The further up you are above the 50 line, the more preponderance of positivity. The further below you are, the more negativity there is. And so this credit confidence has struggled to is just about just in the positive region. Business confidence across these sectors has struggled to stay positive. And so if there was enough business confidence, the private sector might actually want to go and borrow some money from the banking sector. The state of business confidence has really struggled. And so if you look at aggregated data rather than disaggregated for credit confidence and business confidence, the story is very much the same. And it's worth considering that within the banking sector, so the State Bank also has a bank lending survey, and this is a very specific question from survey from the people who are surveyed. How have the following factors affected the overall availability of funds for loans during the last 3 months at your bank? And so yes, there's a certain negative sentiment around government borrowing, which is the dotted orange line, but then you look at these other 3 solid lines, which are non-performing loans, macroeconomic situation, and the policy decision for the interest rate. And for a lot of this time period post 2018, actually you see the other 3 lines, which are further down below in the negative region than government borrowing. And so there is, if you assess the banking sector's own sentiment, the banking sector seems to think that there is something else also going on in this story besides just the government borrowing, and these factors are hardly ever discussed. So there's definitely more to the picture than just the government is crowding out the private sector. There's a pool of scarce loanable funds, and the government is taking it all, and therefore the private sector is dying of thirst. That's not what's happening. This is also really interesting because if you look at the overall, here the question is, how do you expect the following to change during the next 3 months at your bank? And this is demand for loans and availability of funds. The banking sector has not struggled to stay positive in its confidence, in its sentiment. And I think this is papering over the issues that I suspect are there with sovereign risk and financial fragility in the banking sector. And this is consistent with what I am saying is a euphoria of the boom within the banking sector. I'm over time, so I think the critical question is if most of the demand in the financial system, in the banking system for credit is coming from the government, what happens if that demand just completely tanks? And I think the answer is that I don't think all of that liquidity is going to go to the private sector. The private sector doesn't want it, and so what you're going to get is a massive financial crash. And no matter what happens, any change of behavior is dangerous. If the central bank stops supplying reserves, you have a problem. If the banks stop lending to a deficit spender, non-money issuing government, you have a problem. And if the government stops borrowing, you again have a problem, because I don't think anybody is betting on the government to become is betting on the government to get into a fiscal surplus anytime soon. So this is another look at reserve money. Yes, the reserve ratio has been stable, but when you compare the reserve money growth to bank credit that's going to the government sector, reserve money is actually lagging. And so I think the implications are that we really need to think about the private banking sector acting as a public utility or providing a public utility, which is something that happens all across the world. But in our specific case, how is this going to be regulated? And what really is the point of the government having its own central bank? Because the central bank will not create money for it. It will not take its advice or fall under its influence. It will not guarantee its obligations. So what really, from the government's point of view, is the point of having its own central bank? And is the state bank then still a public institution? And I do think that the state bank is a political actor. It issued 2 briefs in 2021 in defense of the 2022 amendment that was coming up, and I think it needs to manage its reputation better with the public. What is it doing? And I do think Section 9C needs to go from the State Bank Act. I think that is partly responsible for this. The idea that Section 9C from the State Bank Act, the borrowing prohibition on the government, was going to discipline the government. We need to rethink the sort of checks and balances that we're placing on the government. So, all right. Thank you. I've taken up more than my share of time. I'm sorry about that. Right. Hamza, you're doing the comments. We need
I don't think we need the
you
presentation. I
don't
just
think
have
okay.
questions.
Okay, sure.
So yeah, thank you. I think it's a very well written paper, as I've told you a couple of times before as well. So like macro has never been a strong suit. So excuse my the naivety of my questions. So my question is or a comment is on the causality of money creation that the endogenous money model suggests uh, that the private banks are creating money by giving out loans, which is
Yes.
creating deposits. And to me and to someone who's like gone through schools where standard economic money, standard money theory has been prevalent, that that's a very alien concept to sort of understand of what's happening right there. So if you can kindly elaborate in your paper as well, the term that you use, that loan creates
Right. So loans, I mean, this is very, if you look into the post Keynesian literature, and there are some
Yeah.
really good textbooks, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels, this idea of loans creating deposits rather than loans being given out of the deposits, it is very common. It's, and you can also see these sort of ideas within
Yeah.
the Bank of England. I mean, the Bank of England video is a really good place to start. It's on the YouTube channel. Just look for Bank of England money creation in a modern economy. That's a good place to start.
And the other thing is that in the post Keynesian endogenous money model framework, you say that the government debt is not risk free. There's a bubble that will burst at any moment. And what sort of my question is, what sort of fiscal policy measures can the government do to negate or eliminate that risk at all, if it can at all? And
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the intended purpose of Section 9C was to get the government to be more disciplined in its fiscal spending. I don't think the central bank law is something which should be used as a tool to discipline the government. We can disagree about what we think how the government should be disciplined, but I don't think the State Bank Act is the right vehicle to try to do that. And as far as there's as long as you have that, you really will. It puts the government of Pakistan in an absolutely impossible position, I think, because it doesn't leave it any other option other than to either run a fiscal surplus and run it consistently, or to go to the banking sector for the money that it needs. And so I think the government of Pakistan has really been put into an impossible position. It's been shackled. What do institutions or people do when you completely shackle them? They don't exactly behave the way you want them to behave. I don't think that's been helpful. Okay, there are a lot of questions.
Thank you. My name is Shahzad. I am from State Bank of Pakistan. And that is really a very good paper. And the points you have raised, for example, issue of sentiments and profitability, they are indeed important. But when we talk about crowding out, so we see that that's also a real issue. So I think we have limited pool of funds. And if we see the data, at the end of 2023, the bank balance sheet of banking sector, 60% of that was going towards government. And I think if we also see the data, we see that there is no incidence of bank failure. So when we say that the banks are assuming that government debt is risk free, so I think they are right in assuming that, because there is no incidence of bank failure in recent history, at least as far as I know, in case of Pakistan. So banking sector is right in assuming that the government debt is risk free, and private sector debt is of course risky when there are higher vulnerabilities in terms of economic vulnerabilities. So I think the points you have raised, they are indeed relevant. Sentiments, profitability, productivity, they are indeed relevant. But we should not omit crowding out issue, because that is also a relevant issue. Thank you.
So I'll just briefly respond to that. I yes, there has been no incidence of bank failure, and my response to that is yet. It has only been barely been 3 years since the 2022 amendment, which has really caused a fundamental shift in the monetary institutional architecture of this country. I don't think that's a small change. And I don't know how to, I do struggle with explaining this. I don't know how to explain that we're not going to see the implications of that amendment unless we start using a credit money, endogenous money view. Because this scarce pool of money story is just persistent. It just never goes away. I think like a lot of bad ideas. But I don't want to see a bank failure. But I don't want to see it at all. But I would not be surprised at all either if we see one. If we see a proper crash. We don't want to start, right? At the back there. Sure.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Lamsul alumni. I write on global economy for Khaleej Times, and I also teach for Pakistan Stock Exchange. It's a very fascinating presentation in a way that most of the ये जो interest rate है, हुकूमत आराम से इन्फ्लेशन से 2-3% ऊपर क्यों नहीं रख देती? बिकॉज सारा तो डेट देने में जा रहा है लोकल बैंक्स को, और डिमांड पुल इन्फ्लेशन तो है नहीं, कॉस्ट पुल इन्फ्लेशन, और आपने नहीं दिखा दिया कि लोग प्राइवेट सेक्टर तो बोरो कर नहीं रहा. तो व्हाट्स रॉन्ग विद रिड्यूसिंग द इंटरेस्ट रेट्स? इन्फ्लेशन से थोड़ा ऊपर रख लें, 6-7-8% रख लें. और फॉर्मर गवर्नर मुर्तजा साहब भी बैठे हुए हैं, उनसे भी मैं इस पर फीडबैक लेना चाहूंगा कि अगर गवर्नमेंट ही बोरो कर रही है बैंक से तो सूद कम रखें, इन्फ्लेशन के ऊपर रखें. इन्फ्लेशन अगर 5% है तो 7-8% रखें. क्यों नुकसान अपना कर रहा है हुकूमत 6 ट्रिलियन का? 6 ट्रिलियन इज लाइक 3 times द डिफेंस बजट. तो ये क्या बैंक्स के लोग लॉबी करते हैं कि सूद भी ज्यादा रखते हैं? मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी कमेटी में भी अपने लोग बिठा देती हैं और बताती हैं कि इन्फ्लेशन तो डिमांड पुल तो है ही नहीं, कॉस्ट पुश इन्फ्लेशन है. तो इसमें मैं आपका भी चाहूंगा, और अगर मुर्तजा साहब भी इस पे थोड़ा सा अपना एक कमेंट दे दें तो फायदा हो जाएगा.
So the interest rate issue, this is a difficult issue. So I'll give you two points on this. One, that there is within the post-Keynesian literature, one point of view is that interest rates should be kept low anyway. Right? That's one view, that you just keep the interest rate low anyway. There's no point pushing it higher. Because the sources of credit demand, because the money supply is endogenous. It's not directly related to the interest rate. So the interest rate is not directly connected to the money supply. So ek to ye view hai. The other view is that the policy rate doesn't actually matter that much for the Pakistani economy specifically, because financial inclusion is very low. Most of the country is not banked, and so the monetary policy, especially through the interest rate, does not really have the channels that it needs to work at all. So I'm trying to, jo aapka sawal hai or comment, I've tried to put it in perspective. Dr. Murza, would you like to add something, or can you please, Dr. Murza, please mic. Thank you.
सबसे पहले तो I think it's really good that I no longer work for the state bank. So the hostility towards me could be a little bit lower, I think. So, but I know, having said that, the paper is very interesting. मैं आपके सवाल का भी जवाब दूंगा अभी एक सेकंड में. I just wanted to caution sort of a few things. देखिए, सबसे पहले तो ये कि ये amendment जो आई थी 2022 में, it's still very recent, right?
Yes.
So we have to try to understand why the amendment came, right? What was the intention behind it? Amendment के पीछे जो एक बहुत बड़ी, I think, motivation थी, वो ये थी कि to try to bring the central bank law in conformity with where the economics thought and economic research of recent years in monetary policy had gone. और उसमें, Daniyal, I would disagree with you कि putting some kind of prohibition on monetary financing of the budget deficit is actually good practice, because it's a highly inflationary process. And in Pakistan, inflation ka typically problem raha hai. We've suffered from very high bouts of inflation, which is very, very costly, especially for, the lower segments of the income population. So ek to ye tha ki try to modernize the central bank law. I will also tell you that before we did that, there were already regulations there prohibiting excessive government borrowing.
Yes.
Any government borrowing that was done was supposed to be returned within the same quarter.
Yes.
It was in the law.
Yes.
It was not followed. Similarly, we have a fiscal, I think it's called the public debt law or something like that. Just likha hua hai ki our public debt should not go above 60% of GDP. Wo bhi on paper it exists. Usko bhi follow nahi karte, right? So there's a difference between what you have on paper and what's happening in practice in Pakistan. And I think the attempts that were being made over the years with institutional reforms is to try to constrain very wild macroeconomic management. Because Pakistan mein ye hoti hai, unfortunately.
Right.
Aapne dekha har 2-3 saal ke baad we have to go to the IMF. It's almost as if our growth model is kind of destined for boom busts. इसको अब constrain करने की जरूरत थी. एक तरफ fiscal से करने की कोशिश की, monetary से हमने कोशिश की. We can debate about whether we went too far, whether prohibiting any kind of monetary financing of the budget was actually going to the other extreme. My personal view is that it was a little bit too extreme. We should have put some sort of limit around it. We should have linked it to tax revenue or something like that, ताकि थोड़ा सा incentive compatible भी हो जाता. But I think some kind of limit was needed because of Pakistan's boom busts, which were typically, coming from a very lack of responsibility of the fiscal agent in the country.
I don't disagree with you on that.
Yeah. So but in terms of what you're presenting, which is very interesting, okay, whether it's basically a credit demand sort of being very weak in the private sector and no crowding out happening, maybe ek to main kahunga ki let's let this story play out a little bit more because the amendments are too recent. And secondly, apna jo aapka window hai, try to also look at maybe years, a sort of slightly longer time horizon, because this issue of crowding out has been in a feature of Pakistan's commentary for a long time, even before the amendments came.
Yes.
Right. Ye story to काफी देर से चल रही है.
बहुत पुरानी story.
And there are reasons why private credit demand is low right now. We know we've just come out of a very severe economic crisis. We're still kind of teetering. We don't know where growth is coming from. So there are reasons why private credit demand is low right now. So taking a sort of slightly longer time horizon might give us some more clues as to whether your story kind of holds even outside of this abnormal period that we are in right now. आपका जो सवाल था खरीज टाइम्स वाला जो था इसमें मैं आपको वैसे bilaterally भी कह दूंगा. I don't want to use up too much time. I think your instinct is totally correct कि inflation से थोड़ा सा ऊपर रखें interest rate को तो बेहतर होता है. लेकिन मैं सिर्फ ये कहूंगा कि inflation को थोड़ा सा forward looking तरीके से देखा करें. Not just कि आज की inflation क्या है. This is what the state bank does. It tries to project कि inflation कहाँ होगी in 12 to 18 months क्योंकि lags होते हैं monetary policy में. आज आप interest rate change करते हैं वो इकोनॉमी को अफेक्ट करती है 1 साल के बाद 1.5 साल के बाद. तो जब आप ये कह रहे हैं कि थोड़ा सा इंटरेस्ट रेट को इन्फ्लेशन से ऊपर रखें, बिल्कुल आप सही कह रहे हैं. स्टडी स्टेट में ऐसे ही होना चाहिए. लेकिन आज की इन्फ्लेशन के साथ ही जो आप फोरकास्ट कर रहे हैं 12 महीने में 18 महीने में, जो कि आजकल स्टेट बैंक इज बीइंग trying to be quite transparent about where it sees inflation going in 12 to 18 months. The last thing I'll just say, Daniyal, is कि ये political actor जो आपने कर दिया है ये थोड़ा सा इसको reconsider करें. I think what we were trying to do with the 2022 amendment, वो जो 2 notes भी हमने निकाले थे, was to try to communicate a bit better, because I think there was a lot of confusion around the amendment. कि इससे क्या होने वाला है, ये क्यों हो रहा है, ये इससे क्या फायदे होंगे, क्या नुकसान हो रहे थे. It was an attempt, maybe it was a clumsy attempt, maybe we could have done things better. Totally, we're always learning. But as you know, central bank communication is an art. और उसमें हमने forward guidance भी कोशिश की, even that kind of didn't quite work in Pakistan's context. So I would just sort of, to defend my ex-colleagues and myself, I guess, in that same vein, that thoda sa the 2022 amendment was an attempt to just improve the level of discourse, taking it away from some of the very negative things that were being said in the press. That was what it was.
Right. I'll just, we are out of time, and there's something very important happening outside, which is tea, and far more important than my presentation. I do just want to say 2 things. I don't disagree that the government needs fiscal discipline. I don't disagree with that. I'm just not sure that the central bank organic law is the place to do it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying the government doesn't need fiscal discipline. Yes, it does. It cannot be a persistent deficit spender through booms and busts. That's not done. right? So that I agree with, and I agree. Central bank communication is an art. I just think it's a political art. If if we see the work of people like Eric Monnet, Manuela Moschella, people who are thinking about central banking and monetary policy, actually the present discourse is about central banks as political actors. So and monetary policy having political stakes, and so this apolitical monetary policy story seems, it seems pretty done even where the economic discourse is established and the standards are set. So yeah, I'm happy to stick around for another 10
I'll
minutes.
just make a small comment.
Ji, zarur.
Very quickly. My name is Hassan. Thank you very much. Very rich, detailed, and foresightness इसमें है discussion में. As a lawyer, I was just quickly going through the amendment. My 2 pence is just input. It's 1956 का act है, which means it's been around for a long time. 2015 में इसमें amendments हुई हैं. So that means after 2015, it was now amended in 2022. On a scale wise, there were 84 amendments, which is massive, which is restructuring the nature of a law. Without even going into details, I could not read 84 amendments in this span of time. Act mein maximum you go about, on an average, is about 5, 10, 15, and they are critical. 9C ke andar there is subsection 2 which actually contradicts the C ka nature. If you go through 9 ka, it's empowering at one end, but 9C ka subsection 2 actually takes away and saying you can't interfere if government does anything or loan lends karta hai ya borrow karta hai. Then there's another one in section 3 which says ke state bank, and I don't know why, can actually own movable and immovable assets. But 139 के अंदर वो लिखा है कि you can't go into transactions and business related आप नहीं कर सकते. So what perhaps you can, it is a critically, you have to analyze this because this will lend the space in which state bank will move, and all the variables जो आप discuss कर रहे हैं वो जिसमें inflation है, crowding effect है, जो भी है वो invariably effect होगा. और 22 का act अगर ये challenge नहीं हुआ 24 तक, that means it's very well there to stay. और इसके repercussions क्या होंगे, मैं तो देखते ही आपको पता है कि it has massive repercussions in terms of state bank is acting like a hybrid between a big bank versus a regulator and a policy maker. That's my 2 pence.
I'll have to think about this stuff. I know parts of the State Bank Act well, I think, but I don't quite have the grasp on it the way I would want to, and so I don't have the act in front of me right now. So, but thank you. I'll look into this. So, Ji, Anjum Saab, of course.
Daniyal, you have two competing theories. There's the exogenous money supply, and there's the endogenous version.
Yes.
Empirically, how would you establish which one applies? And the data that you presented, presumably it's consistent with your hypothesis. Can it be consistent with the other as well? So in other words, do we go away believing in your version or the standard version, and you have to give us some way of pinning it down that this is the data which is consistent with yours and cannot be consistent with others?
I think the data that is consistent with mine is the position of the Bank of England and the German central bank. I think that's, and also of the state bank. I don't think the state bank considers the rupee a commodity. I think the promissory statement on the banknote is pretty clear. The rupee is not really for sale as such. It's not made for sale. I think the data can be consistent with both theories. So it depends on how you tell the story. And this is one of those big issues. This goes back to this debate between the banking school and currency school in Britain in the 19th century, and arguing about the nature of money. What should the Bank of England be doing or what it shouldn't be doing? So these are long-standing debates, and I'm sure you will find support. You will find support for both. I think I prefer to see it this way. So one of my professors is he's known for his Marxist economics, Duncan Foley. He said once in a lecture that it's not a matter of whether the labor theory of value is right or not. It's good every once in a while to just pretend that it's true. And the things that, so essentially you're putting it on like a pair of lenses, and you see what becomes clearer as a result. It's not a matter of which one can be econometrically tested and proven to be the right one, and that's that. There's a really nice book by Antonia Settle on risk and the rupee in Pakistan's new economy. She's actually arguing that the Pakistani economy, there's a case to be made for the commodity theory and against the credit theory. So the credit theory needs a bit more nuance, and the commodity theory needs to be taken seriously. I think that's a good argument. It's an argument I want to engage with. There's only so much room in this paper for now. There's something I haven't gotten around to yet, and certainly only so much time in the presentation. So Abdullah is here. I see Abdullah. I'm glad you made it. And he's sitting in the second row, log piche dekh rahe hain, but he's right here. But thank you so much. This was wonderful, an enjoyable panel, and thank you. And Dr. Murtaza, thank you for your remarks and candid comments. Thank you so much.